Everybody, it's such a pleasure and honor to have with us Teresa Head Gordon from Berkeley. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Teresa about making and living histories. It's
Okay.
yours.
Thank you very much for the invitation. This is quite an unusual talk to have put together. I guess I am hopefully, think that the history should start with what my former postdoc advisor said were two dominant types of scientists that emerge from two types of childhood. And one is from those who have either one or both academic parents or at least parents that are highly educated versus, scientists who emerge from sort of working class backgrounds. And I came from the latter. And as I learned later, even though I grew up in Akron, Ohio, my parents were pretty much following a Danish model where my childhood was actually very unstructured. I woke up at 7 in the morning and got dressed and effectively didn't come home for the rest of the day, starting at about 5 years of age, where it was just nothing but unstructured play and friends and friendships and relationships and outdoor activities. And so unlike my own children who therefore had academic parents who had very structured environments, I think that true freedom really gave me an early confidence in it. And it also gave me this ability for or desire for independence and ability to, sort of treasure independent thought. And I think that was again because I was sort of pretty autonomous from quite an early age. And then of course, without that guidance, there's also lots and lots of mistakes that you make as you try to sort of navigate your career. And so sometimes it's actually good to have those parents who sort of know what's going on. But I had great parents. They were very supportive, and I'm appreciative of that childhood. So I loved school immediately, and I loved everything about it. I loved the way it smelled. I loved my teachers. I loved all of the books, and I loved all of the art supplies, and I enjoyed the competition of school and obtaining good grades. And I really did have an affinity for mathematics and the sciences early on. My upward mobile parents moved from inner city Akron to an affluent suburb when I was in my early teens. And those public schools were clearly superior. And I had to play catch up in my studies that I'm quite grateful that my parents did that for me because it allowed me to then be able to go to university. So I was the first person in my greatly extended family for many, many decades to be able to go to university. And back when we had a more generous and functioning federal government, it helped me with the finances through Pell Grants and student loans to allow me to attend Case Western Reserve University, which regionally it was as a private school that was considered to be quite prestigious. And but still, when you come from that working class background, you're sort of always drawn back home. And so every summer I would go back home and I would take a working class job waitressing to sort of get ready for paying for my books, etc. But at the same time, I'm looking at my peers and I can see that they're doing research. And so I thought, I need to do this. And so in my last summer of undergraduate, I was able to get a position in Al Anderson's lab, who was a theoretical chemist, and he was working on approximate semi-empirical methods for quantum mechanics. And what I was able to do was to use those methods to help explain some photoemission spectroscopy for these silicon thalassionides that I'm showing here. And his models, where his sort of methods for quantum mechanics, um, you know, showed that you essentially needed to sort of include a greater extended environment of the full thalassonide ring to actually understand the electron transfer process through these sort of stacked organizations. And so got my first publication in JAX in 1985. And yep, I liked graduate, I really liked research compared to waitressing, and it seemed like graduate school might be actually possible. But again, you're always kind of drawn back and forth, and kind of the expectation from a working class background is that you get a job and you start doing and earning money. And so I did consider, and I did try to apply to jobs in industry. I interviewed with R.J. Reynolds, the tobacco company, entry-level positions in, lab chemist positions. And I did really poorly in those interviews. I wasn't sophisticated enough to understand, I knew how to interview for a waitress position. I did not know how to do it for a professional position. So I was naive. But I think there was also something that was making me realize that I wouldn't do well in a 9 to 5 job having a boss. And there was something about this computation and theory research work that I had done that was combining math and physics and then this freedom that you didn't have to stand on your feet and work, you could sit and think was just like kind of astonishing to me. And so I did apply to a PhD program at Carnegie Mellon University, and I was introduced to biophysics by Charlie Brooks, and I was his first graduate student. And Charlie introduced me to statistical mechanics, and he introduced me to proteins. And more importantly, the fact that science was a lifestyle. And so what I'm showing here is that he so generously sent me when I was just a second year graduate student to Paris, to a CCAM meeting. And that was my first time out of the country. And then it made me realize that this is not a job. Okay, this is kind of, a lifestyle ambition that one can have. And so I loved graduate school. I worked day and night. I sometimes slept in the Mellon Institute Library, which is, not on the main CMU campus, which I'm showing there to the left. But, to keep me balanced, I was also got married to my husband, Martin, where we met in graduate school. And here I'm showing him forcing me out on the weekends with our Yugo, with our bike rack, to go cycling, to kind of just say that, just kind of want to make sure that the students or the people in the audience don't think that it's all work and no play. Okay, so then my thesis work was in protein biophysics, and I really truly relished proteins, working on proteins. It was sort of, they're so amazing. And it's also just the fact that one could do analytical theory. And so what I did was to essentially try to understand why superoxide dismutase could actually catalyze superoxide to hydrogen peroxide at rates that were nearly perfect, that were diffusion controlled. And to do that, it turns out that this protein dimer had its organized electrostatics in such a way that in spite of having a negative charge itself, could attract another negative charge. So basic electrostatics would say that that shouldn't be favorable, it shouldn't be fast. Salt should actually increase the rate, but in fact, it decreased the rate. And mutations could essentially upset this. And the surface area of where the active site was tiny. And so I developed this analytical theory using Huckel and building on the famous John Kirkwood's description of the electrostatic potential energy surface by introducing dielectric boundary conditions, the fact that proteins are low dielectrics and sitting in a high dielectric environment. And that the only way I could do that analytically was to assume that the protein was a sphere. And that was good enough because then I could differentiate that and get forces, and I could simulate this with Brownian dynamics and use branching arguments to extract rates that were near quantitative with experiment. But what it really sort of showed then was that, really you could have got this just by looking at the field lines of this potential. And remarkably, proteins over evolutionary time, this superoxide dismutase, had essentially created this attractive sink of electric field lines near the active site, and then field lines that were repulsive so that you lower the dimensional space on which the superoxide diffused to direct it to the sort of this tiny active site. And so you can see then why salt decreases the rate and why mutations could actually destroy that effect. I then went on to Bell Labs, and it was just an amazing place. Tiny research groups, one postdoc, a PI will get one postdoc, and maybe a research technician if you were, like if you were an experimentalist, and therefore hands-on research was essential and collaboration was essential. And so I worked with the wonderful Frank Stillinger. He also was a stat mechanician, very famous. We worked on perturbation theory for water and global optimization. And he loved, he loved toy models. I worked with a bunch of, and saw a bunch of wonderful people in the Bell Labs environment. And then the job hunt happened, and I needed to go out on the market. And so Martin had actually started sooner, and that means that after only 4 months, I had to start looking for a job. And that at the same time, I was trying to balance starting a family, and I had my daughter Genevieve in December of 1990, but then I had to interview from January to March. And so, I just wanted to kind of say how, it was a difficult time. I was breastfeeding, and I was too embarrassed while I was on the road to sort of ask for people to help me make time in my schedule to be able to express milk. And so I would just lie, I just duck into the bathroom and do it. And then I eventually was able to ask, the people I was visiting, and I want to be very grateful to the male experimental faculty who stored my breast milk in their lab freezers and who really took care of it and brought it back to me before I flew home. Okay, then we had the two-body problem, and we had two joint offers. And so one was in Alabama, the other one was at UC Berkeley, and we decided to take the Berkeley position. And our second daughter, Nadine, was born again, help with my mom's great help. And I knew very little about the national lab system. I was given 2 years of support to cover my salary. I had to pay it back as soon as I got funded grants. It was a really tough time, but I managed to extract a few students and a postdoc and some funding. And I did what was called the forbidden transition, which means that I was a staff scientist at LBL, and I was able to have, I had supporters at UC Berkeley who then hired me as an assistant professor in bioengineering, where computational biology was being built. And so I'm just showing here that some of that early work was trying to sort of tie together how to develop potentials of mean force for amino acid interactions in water, has a way to essentially try to do sort of physics-based protein folding with experimental input. So today my research program has expanded. It's a long time ago, after those early years. And I would say that I sit at that interface between quantum mechanics and statistical mechanics still. I still love applied mathematics. I love biological systems. I've moved on to things like proteins with intrinsic disorder. Machine learning is a natural segue because machine learning really has a lot of foundations from statistical mechanics and applied mathematics, which I've had a long history in myself. So I'll summarize by saying that, careers are living time trajectories, and they move you through these unexpected changes in your life. But to be patient, which is success can come, because those small initial steps that seem so finite in the beginning do grow and they compound, and things just build upon themselves. And that to also acknowledge the fact that those early steps are hard, that family and careers are difficult to navigate, and it's better now. But it's a great challenge for women, and there's no need to sidestep that issue. Ask for what you need. Okay, it gets easier with time. And my daughters have assured me, and my niece over here, and these are my two daughters and my niece, that they had a great childhood. And watching as faculty, you might think it's too much, but remember, there's no boss, there's time flexibility, it's a stable and remarkable lifestyle, and the constant renewal of new people. And here's my wonderful research group. There's nothing better than working with students and postdocs. And then social responsibility in science is really important, and I hope that we make a difference in people's lives, and I believe that that's what we do. Thank you very much, everybody. I hope I didn't go too much over time.
Thank you so much, Teresa, for a fantastic and wonderfully inspiring talk. We have a few seconds left, and I'll take the opportunity to ask a variant of a question that has come in via chat. Um, the person who asked it wants to know, actually, variants of multiple questions now that have come in via chat, which are all on the same theme, which is that you've done it all, balanced, going from first gen to faculty member to raising a family to solving the two-body problem, making the forbidden transition. You did it all. You are doing it all. When did you find time to rest? And how do you do it all?
Actually, what I will say is that there isn't too much rest in the early stages of career, but that you have a lot of energy and drive because you're younger. But what I will say is that after a while you get practiced, you can manage more as time goes on because you just have more experience. You just have done it and you can do it again, and then doing it again makes it easier, which means you can add on something else. And so I think what I'm trying to say, it sounds like it's like, that's what I mean. I worry that sometimes people think faculty do too much. But what I want to say is it's a fulfilling life and that it gets easier with time. So be patient.
Thank you. Um, in just a few seconds, would you please comment on any aspect of that that was specific to being a woman?
Well, I mean, there's just no getting around the biological clock. And I'm just saying that, right when all of us are trying to build our careers is when we're also trying to start families. And just mothers just have a more specific role that has to be played, in, especially in the early years. And so, I think is just trying to say is that I think that that's just something we have to accept and recognize. I hope that that's a good enough answer for
Uh,
such a.
it is, and thank you again. Thank you very much for a really inspiring talk. There are many, many more questions, but we will get to them via chat.